Media Pal with WorldNet Daily. We're here with defense attorney Roger Roots, who represents numerous January 6th defendants. And Roger, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Alicia. Great to be on.
Hold on. See this? There we go. Thank you for joining us today. I mean, every time I get a moment to speak with you throughout this year covering January 6th, it's like explosive content comes out of those phone calls, whether it be the Proud Boy verdicts coming in or some other kind of crisis situation coming out of the federal courthouse. Roger, why don't you start by telling us about which January 6th defendants you have represented over the past 3 years?
Well, of course, I work with the John Pierce law firm. So John Pierce and I and the firm have, honestly, I think I've lost count, but it's over 30 January 6th defendants. And of course, I've worked with a couple other lawyers in addition to John Pierce. I worked with Stephen Metcalf in that the big Proud Boy trial representing Dominic Pizzola. That was a 4-month trial. And that was my first January 6th trial, the biggest, which is really the biggest of the January 6th trials. After that, we had the Christopher Alberts trial. Now, another January 6er, a great guy from the state of Maryland. He, was one of the guys early on on the Capitol grounds, and he was accused of going up the stairs. One of the first people up one of the landings on one of the stairways, and he actually was also one of the few J6ers that was accused of having a firearm. And of course, he was a tow truck driver, and he packed a firearm at all times for his job, for his own safety. And so it was just part of his uniform, really. He never even touched it. But nonetheless, a lot of headlines made a big deal out of that. So he was convicted, unfortunately, at trial of several charges. He's now doing, I believe, a 7-year prison sentence. Of course, Dominic Pizzola with the Proud Boys was sentenced to 10 years, and the government is seeking a higher sentence for all the Proud Boy.
After watching what the Proud Boys were going through, Enrique Tarrio, Ethan Nordine, Joe Biggs, Zachary Rail, and Dominic Pizzola, for months on end, watching them basically be muzzled and framed and lied about, it's like witnessing a rape or a murder, especially considering the amount of time the government's asking for. Even more time. Talk about how the governments are appealing the Proud Boys sentencing to give them more time, and what's happened since then. Have you made any strides to eliminating even more bogus years added to their sentence?
Well, let me just say what the government does in all these cases is they play games with the U.S. sentencing guidelines. So a lot of people do not realize this, but the sentencing guidelines are a 2-volume set of books. So the both volumes are probably, 2,000 pages of so-called guidelines. And a lot of people are tricked and think that it's a mathematical formula. And I think even the judges and the prosecutors promote it as if it's some kind of mechanical formula, and it's almost like a science. And I'll just tell you, it's more like an art. It really is it is a system that is filled with traps for the unwary and different tricks that prosecutors use to add enhancements. I'll just give you an example in the Proud Boy case with Dominic Pizzola. So they used his conviction for breaking a window, one pane of glass, and we showed at trial that even that one pane of glass, even by the government's own ridiculously over exaggerated computations, that one pane of glass could have been no more than $750 damage. In fact, we had a window expert that said he could put that in for $150. Almost any window repairman in DC could have done that for under $500. Nonetheless, Pizzola was wrongly convicted of a crime called damaging federal property over $1,000 value. Okay, now from there, he goes to sentencing. And with all the other counts he was convicted of, the government adds all these little enhancements and adjustments, upward adjustments, one of which is the terrorism enhancement. And if you read the terrorism enhancement in the federal sentencing guidelines, it says it shall apply to the following very short list of crimes, but one of which is property destruction. So, on the basis of property destruction, breaking one pane of glass, he was given an extremely high sentence for with a terrorism enhancement, and of course they also use other upward adjustments and enhancements such as having an official victim. By the way, many of these J6ers are they're charged or convicted of an offense that might be called something like assaulting an officer. Okay, and the guidelines make it clear, and the sentencing ranges that Congress puts into those crimes make it clear that a person is already being savagely prosecuted with extremely high sentences for having the victim of an assault be an officer. All right, that's the name of the crime, assaulting an officer. And yet at sentencing, they will do an upward adjustment to tack on and double count that it's an official victim. And you see this all through the guidelines. So what they do is manipulation of the guideline numbers to get these guys into these extremely high sentencing zones. And then the judges play a game of saying, well, he's in a range of 10 years to 14, and I'm just going to give this guy a real break by sentencing him to 10 years, at the lower end of the range. The range is artificially concocted.
Are terror enhancements typically added to defendants in sentences? Really, these are petty crimes a lot of the times. Misdemeanors. I mean, isn't this unheard of in prosecutorial history? All of this sort of creative prosecution, the arbitrary sentencing applied to these defendants. We were hoping they wouldn't give them terror enhancements. We saw them come in for the Oath Keepers. Just, you still think the election was stolen. You still said that in an interview. Terror enhancement, Judge Mehta just gave to Stuart Rhodes. Terror enhancement for Zachary Rail for doing interviews with the Gateway Pundit. So, what are these terror enhancements about? And how often have they been used like this?
Very rarely. All of us know, in our minds, when we think of terrorism, we think of bombings with massive casualties, mass casualty events, gassings, bombings, extreme, violent, violent episodes of massive deaths and things. And yet in the January 6th context, these judges have applied terrorism enhancements to things like breaking a pane of glass, bending a fence. Literally, bending a fence was used to tack on terrorism enhancements for some of the Proud Boys. The idea of contesting an election, all of us recognize that it's a First Amendment laden kind of thing. Like a person is making political advocacy, which should have some First Amendment protection. And yet in the January 6th context, these judges have basically held that the First Amendment offers no protection whatsoever to these guys. So one after another of these judges has ruled that there is no First Amendment protection whatsoever. Essentially, they have ruled that every single J6er was just at the Capitol that day to attack the Capitol, to stop the proceedings, to thwart or to harm or hurt or kill Congress people. It's a joke. We all know that it was a political protest. It was a massive act of political group advocacy, and everyone recognizes this, except federal prosecutors and federal judges.
And federal informants like sedition hunters. But also, what about the issue of confidential human sources? How many confidential human sources have been infiltrating patriot groups, conservative groups? I know in the Proud Boys they had sealed hearings in which the jury wasn't allowed to discover how many CHSs were embedded within the Proud Boys on January 6th or leading up to January 6th. And we all can suspect that Ray Epps is a CHS, but tell us about these CHSs, Roger, and how's the FBI been deploying them to accomplish its weaponization of free speech?
Well, we have only scratched the surface. We may never actually get a final answer. Every time we ask more questions, there is more sort of a muddling of facts and evasion of the point constantly. We know there were large numbers of undercover informants wearing plain clothes that were employed by the DC police, the Metropolitan Police Department. They had over 24 undercover plainclothes officers among the crowd that day. We know that the DC Capitol Police, that's the police unit that works inside the Capitol and are essentially the security guards for the Capitol. They had undercovers. We've never gotten to the bottom. We have no idea the numbers. FBI, we've never. Christopher Wray, none of the FBI officials have ever squarely answered how many undercover FBI informants were there that day. We know other agencies as well. I mean, think of all the agencies in that have something to do with the Capitol and Washington, D.C. National Park Service, National Park Police, the Secret Service. I myself have questioned the Secret Service, a person on the witness stand, and I said, did the Secret Service have undercover plainclothes? Yes, they did. How many? Objection sustained. The judges never allow any inquiry. They never allow the answers to these questions. And, I'm sure you're aware that now there's all this talk of the House of Representatives. This footage is being released. And of course, there's all these cross claims and cross arguments. Some people say it's good. Some people say it's bad. I think it's great myself. But now there's this idea that they're going to blur. They're going to cause the blur people's faces on this stuff. So it's outrageous because, and they say, well, this is to keep people from being indicted or unnecessarily fingered or targeted. We all know that's not the reason. The reason is they're blurring people's faces because they're trying to protect the undercover plainclothes government assets that were everywhere in the crowd.
One thing that I find really conspicuous that I didn't realize when I first started covering J6 trials is a lot of these judges presided over the Fisa court, which is upstairs on the top floor of the Barry Pretty Man Federal Courthouse. Is there any conflict of interest there? Because people have been bringing to my attention, hey, Judge Lambert was one of the first Fisa court judges. These judges, they have no conscience. We watched them sentence these guys to nearly 30 years in prison. The government wanted more than, it's still asking for 33 to life. And Judge Kelly just acts like he's doing them a favor by giving them 22, 18, 17, 15, 10 for, even if you weren't there. Even if you weren't there. So is there any conflict of interest there? Are you aware of the judge's history prior to presiding over these cases?
Well, let's put it this way. I believe that there are several of the district judges who have been FISA court judges. And of course, for those who don't know, the FISA court is a court where there are no rules. It is the government's, it's like a star chamber, totally secret rulings, secret motions, secret briefs. Everything is secret pretty much. They almost never even release to the public even the results. No one knows really what's going on with it, and it's all unconstitutional. If you look at the Constitution, Article 3, which sets out the judicial branch of government, there is no provision in there for these secret courts to exist, let alone for them to exist side by side using the same judges. So a judge could walk from a district court bench into a secret FISA court proceeding across the hallway or something. I mean, there is no provision for that in the Constitution.
No, appear then the same judges who issued the surveillance warrants to infiltrate the Proud Boys, surveil the Proud Boys, or any of these defendants, are the same judges then presiding over their cases, giving them these ultra-high prison sentences, and allowing them to be tortured. I guess that's what the equation would show then. That seems completely illegal.
Americans have no idea. The average American has no idea how the criminal justice system has been co-opted and essentially taken over by the tyrannical element over the course of American history, such that all the basic protections and freedoms that Americans have thought they enjoyed in the Bill of Rights have just been shaved away. They don't exist. It's just astounding. This country right now has a criminal justice system that is on par with Venezuela, Soviet era, justice.
China.
Ours. I mean, we once thought we were heirs of these great procedural rights and things. And of course, there was that tradition. Our system ultimately comes from these English common law traditions, but it's all been shaved away. And I'll give you one example: the grand jury process. The grand jury process was originally a process where common citizens would act as a check on the government. So 21 Americans would gather and they would investigate on their own, and they could investigate the government. They could investigate the prosecution. They could investigate a prosecutor. Today, it's been turned on its head because the prosecutors are among the grand jurors the entire time. The prosecutors virtually are the master of ceremonies and tell the grand jurors what witnesses to have in front of them. And in fact, the actual prosecutors actually take over the questioning pretty much and control the entire proceedings. And they've turned the constitutional criminal procedure on its head. So the grand jury does no longer acts as a protection for the American people. It actually acts as an arm of the government against the American people.
Well, also, the jurors are evidently being recycled in the federal courthouse. I was at Zachary Lamb's trial with attorney Stephen Metcalf, and during jury selection, we saw like 20 jurors say they were here last week. Not sure if they were struck down or sat in an actual, presided over an actual other trial last week and the week before that, and back to sit in the jury again in a Lamb's trial. And you said you've witnessed the same thing. Talk about
Oh,
that.
yeah. John Pierce and I have seen it in several trials where the jury pool at the beginning of the trial during jury selection, several of our trials, I believe at least two or three, where jurors come forward in the jury pool, and they're asked, "Have you ever sat on a jury before?" They say, "Yeah, I've been on a January 6th jury," and some of them say, "It was last week, and I convicted." I mean, and they're still on the jury pool. Uh, yeah, and the DC jury pool, as you know, is so hostile. It's 92 or 93% Democrat registered voters who voted for Biden in the 2020 election. Uh, the residents of DC, the jury pool, is something like, it depends on how you measure it, something like 60 to 65% of the households are government households. Depends on how you measure it. And even the private sector, um, the purported private sector households, really, in many ways, often are also, government contractors. Think of when you go into these government facilities. For example, in the federal courthouse, there are the cafeteria workers. So they are a subcontractor. They work for a private company that provides the food services in any of these government buildings. So on their payroll, they would be listed as a private sector worker, but in fact, they are just contractually government employees, just like so many others. So it depends on how you measure it, but the majority of the jury pool in these cases are government residents.
Yeah, they work for
Essentially,
the
they know the government.
government. Their family, their husbands work for the Biden administration. Their wife works for the DOJ. One of the potential jurors was a illustrator for the FBI, like the one who writes those FBI most wanted graphics during Thanksgiving
Oh
and
yeah.
Christmas, asking you to turn in your J6 family members. It was bizarre too. Most of these jurors are victims of violent crimes at like a 90% rate. I guess that's demonstrative of DC being a deep blue crime ridden city under Democrat power. But Roger, what can be done about this? I feel like what's absent, what's a complete vacancy, void, is we're not on the offense at all. Why aren't more people? What is the answer for us to file lawsuits? Where are the lawsuits, like a class action lawsuit filed on behalf of all the people who were shot that day, shot in the face, went to their emergency room after breathing in too much CS gas. The police waged first fire against the crowd. It wasn't the other way around in this so-called insurrection. There were people killed that day. That seems to be like almost a forgotten message behind all of this when we're talking about it, because there's no course of action taken towards justice in any of this. On the other hand, there's lawfare being leveled against free speech, protesting, and against media outlets. And of course, these January 6th defendants are just buried in legal fees. I mean, I don't think you could file a lawsuit against the District of Columbia, Muriel Bowser, the Metropolitan Police Department, etc., when you're in trial all day, living and breathing each defendant's case all day, every day. But what do you think about that? Why is something missing here?
Well, I'd hate to say you pretty much nailed it. Frankly, we are outnumbered, we are outgunned, we are out resourced. The government is so powerful right now. The government is like we are like a mouse in the mouth of a cat. They're just playing with us. They know it. They are so the the budgets for these agencies are so massive now. It's nothing like it's nothing like these concepts that all of us have about American freedom and things. These things might have been ideas in the past. There hasn't been any great. There has not been that kind of freedom in this country in decades. The government is so powerful, and the court rulings are so overwhelmingly in favor of the government everywhere. It's like shooting fish in a barrel if you're a federal prosecutor. They have a 100% conviction rate for juries. No jury yet among the January 6 cases has acquitted any January 6 defendant. There have been a couple counts here and there. Our team has won a few counts in a couple trials, and we won some counts in the Proud Boy trial. But by and large, for a federal prosecutor, it's shooting fish in a barrel. They have so much money, so much power, and essentially the federal Justice Department holds all of our lives in the palms of its hands. They can crush us at any time. We are living in a virtual Soviet level control grid, and the government basically is having its period. It is their time. The government has the greatest holiday that government has ever even dreamed of in human history right now in terms of control of a population.
Well, people like to level the attacks against the attorneys. Oh, the attorneys don't know what they're doing. They don't care about us. But in reality, you're almost barred from putting up a proper defense during trial. I know from spending a few days working alongside Stephen Metcalf on Alam's trial again, he intended to get Lieutenant Michael Byrd on the stand and ask about the dispersal orders that were given, irrespective of Babbitt's getting killed. That was barred. In fact, there was like two giant pamphlets of things he cannot talk about. And also, it was peculiar at John Sullivan's trial and Alam's trial. No reference of Babbitt by name, even though these defendants witnessed her get shot up close. I guess you could say that has nothing to do with their case, but it seems like it's also the rules are slanted against the defense from the very beginning, so it's designed for you to lose.
It really is. Most people have no idea. So the government has teams of investigators that will go through a defendant's social media. They will pick out everything that can be used against the defendant. Every Facebook post that a defendant posted somewhere in the years prior that were anti-government, anything that was critical of Congress or anything, and when the defendant tries to point out, well, wait a minute, I say a lot of things on Facebook. I say a lot of things that are supportive of Congress here and there, or that are supportive of law enforcement here or there or something. They are not allowed to put that on because the judges rule, pursuant to the rules of evidence, that is self-serving hearsay. So they do not even allow you to show the jury a more balanced image of yourself. The government could put on nothing but things that make you look bad, and you cannot put on anything to speak of that makes you look good.
Oh, and then what's bizarre too is big tech is coordinating with the government to advance the narrative. Because if you Google, for example, my friend Joe Biggs, who had a whole history on the web of being a journalist, InfoWars host, hosted his own show with Uncensored TV, that's a completely scrubbed. All you'll see is Joe's picture from the Capitol that day in the worst shots you can guess, and that's same for all of these defendants. So that's just some kind of cohesive effort between big tech and the government to wipe away your whole existence prior to January 6th. Well, Roger, I want you to highlight the case you're working on now. All of these defendants need our help. I find solace in how much the American people have supported all of these defendants over the past 3 years. I think we'd be much worse off if not for $10,000 in donations here, $5,000 in donations here. And people don't understand when you take on these cases in order to craft a proper defense. Like if I wanted to file a lawsuit against the government for January 6th or get an attorney to help, that's like a whole lifestyle. That's your entire life, your entire days. Work doesn't end at 5 p.m. I mean, you get up and go back to the courtroom and you do it again, and you have 30 defendants here. So let's talk about the defendant that needs our assistance this week, this month.
Well, I can tell you, one of the cases I'm working on right now is Mr. John George Todd. Now he is like so many others, a guy who, the evidence, he's accused of going inside the Capitol building on January 6th. And he spent a year and a half charged with 4 misdemeanors. Okay, and we have several cases like this. So they spend a year being charged and prosecuted for 4 misdemeanors. They hire us or some attorneys to defend them. They believe they have a defense, and in good faith, they intend to go to trial. They turn down a plea offer where the government says, hey, plead guilty to 1 count and we'll drop the rest, 1 misdemeanor charge. And of course, we know that the vast majority of people are taking these deals. It's the easiest way to get out of this problem. And it irks them, and most of them hate to do it because they believe they have a defense. A lot of them believe they are innocent, but they are pleading guilty just because they don't have the money, and they're all the odds are stacked against them. So they're taking these deals. What happens if you don't take the deal? We actually have, I'm trying to think, we have at least 5 clients who were charged with misdemeanors, just like John George Todd. They turned down a misdemeanor plea offer, in which they could have pled guilty to a 6-month maximum misdemeanor, all right, a Class B misdemeanor, where the maximum possible penalty is only 6 months in jail, and the likely penalty would have been a lot less than that, probably no jail time in reality. They turned down such a plea offer, and what happens right before trial in these cases, even in the most recent case, 2 weeks before trial, John George Todd was hit with a superseding felony indictment, where he's now charged with assaulting officers causing bodily injury. And the government sent us the video, and we're about to file some motions. We really want the public and any the use of force experts to analyze this video, where there was a Metro PD officer with a body cam rolling, and he grabbed onto John George Todd's tiny little flag. He had a little tiny flagpole, a typical fiberglass flagpole, a little stick, essentially, tiny little flag. The officer's pulling it and trying to pull John George Todd's flagpole out of his hand. And then the officer unnecessarily, in my opinion, just breaks the flagpole, decides to break the guy's property. And it's fiberglass. And then the officer cuts his finger on the broken fiberglass flagpole, and then goes and seeks medical treatment. And now they have superseded John George Todd with a 20-year felony, with the idea that he caused bodily injury, which is the statute, 18 U.S. Code Section 111, allows for up to 20 years in prison if you cause bodily injury from a quote-unquote assault or act of impeding or resisting law enforcement. So this officer has a cut on his hand, and now our client went from facing, 6 months or even a year, whatever, even if he'd been convicted of all the misdemeanors, and now he's facing up to 20 years, and his trial has been canceled, and so he once again has to delay proceedings, and he's looking at some future trial date in the future. And again, what they've done is they amp up the charges. And we have 5 clients like this, 5 who had misdemeanor charges for over a year in each case. And in each case, right before trial, the government swooped in and charged them with serious 20-year felonies just to punish them because they would not plead guilty.
And we also saw this with the seditious conspiracy. All of a sudden, everything got way more serious and creepy and dangerous when all of a sudden it was seditious conspiracy a year after these defendants were already held in pretrial detention, uh, Rail, Biggs, Nordine, and then came Tario with the seditious conspiracy charges. So if you decide to stand by your convictions and have no remorse for protesting or have no remorse for thinking the wrong way, and you go to trial, they are going to penalize you for that. Basically, is that basically it? You're gonna all of a sudden risk all this more prison time.
And of course, as you know, it's overtly political. In other words, the people who absolutely drop to their knees, beg for mercy, say that they renounce Trump and they've come to their senses and believe the election was perfect back in 2020. They get lower sentences, and every single player in the game recognizes that they are doing this. They are punishing those who stand on their convictions, while they are essentially rewarding those who collapse and basically maybe register Democrat. The best thing they could do is just register Democrat. You'll get a lower sentence. And I'm only partially joking. In fact, we know there was a Democrat, left-wing Democrat communist activist holding up signs on the Capitol terrace on the east side, who is now a member of the DC City Council, a Democrat, holding up a sign. She participated in all these, she was a counter protester against the J6 Trumpers, running around with a sign essentially mocking the Trumpers, holding a sign, and she was in what the government calls a restricted area, and no charges whatsoever. We know that the first guy who broke a window in the Capitol was a left-wing Democrat activist. He got 4 months in jail. Of course, my client, Dominic Pizzola, broke one pane of glass. A few minutes later, on the other side of the building, he got 10 years in prison. It's so overtly political, and it's the two-tier justice system that everyone has talked about. And anyone who denies it is not looking squarely at the what is going on.
Roger, talk about the appeals process. Are you confident that the Proud Boys will get a fair shake in appeals? And also, I'm not clear yet. What's the update with the motions for the government has filed to appeal for longer sentences?
Yeah, so basically in the Proud Boy case, and by the way, also the Oathkeeper case, both sides are appealing. The defendants are appealing, and the government is appealing because the government wants longer and more severe sentences. It really is outrageous. So you ask about prospects for appeal. I think there are so many great issues, and that is one aspect of having what I would call almost a totalitarian sort of culture that is being imposed at the trial level, that there is what people in the military call a target-rich environment when they're surrounded. So when you're surrounded, people joke in the military, the Marines joke about it, when they're totally surrounded and they look around and they're surrounded by the enemy, they call it a target-rich environment. Let's put it this way. These appeals are a target-rich environment. So that might be one, let's just hope and pray that the upper courts, the courts of appeals, will come to their senses and recognize that a tyranny, an absolute totalitarian tyranny, is being imposed here, and maybe the upper courts will issue some semblance of reasonable and rational rulings in some of these things.
What I understand as well, talking to many defendants, one has filed a lawsuit against Muriel Bowser in the District of Columbia for failing to issue proper dispersal orders in violation of First Amendment protected activity. And by law, they're supposed to instruct all of the protesters to leave in an audible loudspeaker, an audible fashion, and then provide a safe exit. And you can see, like in John Sullivan's case, for example, a cop tells him to go out the door, leave now, and you see someone getting tossed in the background. It looks like bombs are going off. He says, I'm not going out there. And who could blame him in that instance? And that's just true with many of the people who were in the building. Some just went to use the bathroom. Some just went to take reverence of the Capitol and pictures and peacefully walked around. And others in the mayhem, especially leading up to those who were following where Ashley Babbitt got shot, I mean, it was complete mayhem outside of the building at that time, and there was no dispersal order given properly till a quarter to three approximately. And that's a story we're going to work on and a lawsuit that should be filed. But can you talk a little bit about that?
Um, yeah, let me think. There's so many aspects to this. Um, there were some dispersal orders here and there. You can hear, if you look at enough hundreds of hours of footage, you can find some officers saying, time to go, etc. But a lot of the people that were there didn't hear any of that. And so all the first they heard that they're not allowed to be there is when some cop with a baton pushes them down a staircase or something. And the officers were arriving. We all know that they were, as the day went on, it was inevitable. I mean, the cops were coming in from Prince George's County, Maryland, from Virginia State Police. There were armies of cops that were coming in from outside D.C., and it was an army of thousands by about 4 o'clock. Thousands of cops, and they were essentially just pushing people away from the Capitol steps. And there were not sufficient announcements as the law requires. We all know the first rule of trespassing law is that the owner has to inform the people that are trespassing that they're trespassing. All right. And, it might have happened here or there, but haphazardly, it just wasn't done properly. And also, just remember, this is a First Amendment protest. This is political advocacy, and everyone recognizes that there is this culture of civil disobedience that is part of First Amendment protesting. It is part where you do a sit down. And it is honestly, I think a lot of the people that were there that day thought that that's what they were participating in, was sort of a sit down. This idea that you go into a place and you do a sit down, you do civil disobedience, and you expect that, hey, you might face a $50 fine or something like that.
Well, that's
None of them.
because, Roger, the left, they go and do that all the time. After January 6th, last month, before January 6th, during official proceedings, they go and trespass, parade, picket, scream, cry, and yell in the Capitol building, and no repercussions. In fact, the left files lawsuits for police brutality or getting thrown in a kettle for a couple of days after a protest, and they win millions of dollars. And they burn the American flag all the time. And then the Proud Boys burn a Black Lives Matter flag, and it's millions of dollars they must pay there too. It's like what world are we living in?
It really is. It's night and day when you compare cases. Think of the Brett Kavanaugh. When the Brett Kavanaugh hearings to put him on the U.S. Supreme Court were going. Listen, every single protester that showed up was their intention was to obstruct his nomination and to delay and to cause a delay in Brett Kavanaugh's appointment and seating on the U.S. Supreme Court. Okay, and as you point out, some of them, those that were arrested, all the protesters, they might have gotten a $50 fine. Whereas the January 6ers are looking at 20-year felonies for obstruction of an official proceeding, which is nothing, a 6-hour delay, 6 hours of recess in Congress. And for that, these people are facing up to 20 years in federal prison, and many of them are getting 5-year sentences. It really is astounding.
How has this changed your paradigm of the world, your faith? I mean, it's a lot. It's very traumatizing to sit in sentencing hearings, to watch the defendants get completely railroaded, to live through kangaroo trials in what you thought was the most free country on earth with a First Amendment and a Constitution. How has this worn on you?
For a lawyer, it is so it's so depressing. It really is. I've talked to some other defense lawyers, and they said this is one of the most profoundly depressing times in their life as an attorney, just to see how one-sided a system can be, a system that is just aimed at destroying people, in which there is almost no equity given. There is just punished for its own sake, almost as if the entire system is arrayed against these January 6ers. It's like, how dare you? How dare you? And it doesn't matter what the facts are. It doesn't matter what the evidence is. The system just wants to crush them.
There doesn't seem any way out. Congress, what is your perspective on Congress's role in amending some of this crime that's happening within the DOJ and the federal judiciary? What could Congress be doing that they're not?
Congress just keeps giving them more money and more power. Congress keeps giving the DOJ more budgets, larger budgets to do what they're doing. So even though the Republicans supposedly have the majority in the House of Representatives, they haven't used it to do anything other than help the Democrats destroy these people's lives.
Roger, talk about the Bureau of Prison Systems, because Dominic Pizzola's mom, she's just been really distraught. She says that her son has been penalized for saying Trump won in the courtroom. They can just bar your access to communications. Your mom, your dad, your family, your lawyers can't even get a hold of you. And it looks like there's just no checks on this Bureau of Prison system. It just you could vanish into their system and you diesel therapy and transport for months or years.
It's when you think about. Let me just tell you another thing that's going on is these January 6ers only have a couple options. They can go with the public defender. They can, which is available if they cannot afford an attorney. All right, and the public defenders, and I won't criticize them that much. They're committed to some extent. They are good defense lawyers, but frankly, every single one of them, as far as I know, in the D.C. Federal Public Defender's Office, they are anti-Trump. They do not support the J6ers. Often, their first inclination is to just plead them guilty, find a guilty plea option of some kind. And so the John Pierce firm, which I'm with, we get a lot of our clients who have been rejected or have already rejected a plea offer from some other lawyer told them to take. And they said, no, I'm not pleading guilty to a crime I didn't commit. I want to go to trial. And these guys, they know that it's an uphill battle, but they believe that they're innocent, and it would be a sin to falsely say that they're guilty when they're not. And so they don't have many options. And in terms of trying to raise money, some of them try to set up some GoFundMe type accounts, to support their legal defense funds. And guess what happens at sentencing time, when, as is almost inevitable, they are convicted and they're going up to sentencing. The government then swoops in and tells the judge, hey, no one should profit from crime. And therefore, we want the court with us to seize every single penny that the person has raised for his defense. And the government actually asks for every single penny. And some of these judges will take not every penny, but almost, or a good chunk. We just had a client named Joe Thomas, Kenneth Joseph Thomas. The judge ordered $20,000 fine. And this is a poor man he's unemployed, does not even have a job. But because he has had a successful, he has a podcast and he has raised some money on his Give, Send, Go legal defense fund, the judge just ordered him a $20,000 fine. And the government wanted every penny.
And even in his case, we saw, and you can elaborate on this, we saw the police committing crimes that were, I think, blamed on Joseph Kenneth Thomas, and then we saw how he was just trying to help protesters and quell the violence between protesters and the police. And how'd that turn out?
You would think that there would be an inquiry launched because, there were Metropolitan police officers who took the stand under oath and falsely accused Kenneth Joseph Thomas of cutting the tarp that was wrapped around the bandstands that day. Falsely accused him of doing it. The evidence showed that he did not cut anything, and we showed that in fact the Metro PD officers had cut the tarp. And in fact, that very officer who falsely testified against our client had been one of the officers who himself had cut the tarp and done the damage. And yet, as far as I know, there hasn't been any investigation, any inquiry. And in fact, our clients are hit with restitution orders saying that they have to pay for the damage. And of course, at least some of that damage was done by the government.
Well, I hope that Roger, we can continue to highlight your analysis here regularly. You're uniquely positioned to shine light on the truth in this situation. Of course, we know that you're not allowed to really talk about the judges or talk about the cases during trial. Is that right? You risk it
Well,
all if you talk about
yeah.
how evil the judges are.
Well, listen, I, you know, I'll just say we're under protective orders, so we're not supposed to, all of this stuff about all the thousands of hours of footage. We in Discovery, the defense lawyers have access to a lot of the footage. I'm not sure we have all the footage, but we're not supposed to share it to the public. The government seems to be able to share anything it wants, and to spread whatever narrative the government wants. It's just an uneven playing field. And in terms of the judges, listen, I could say a lot of things. I'll just say that the culture of modern judges is so different from the way it was at the time of the founding of the country. One of my heroes is Lord Camden, one of the greatest libertarian judges in history. He was actually an English judge in England in the 1760s. And Lord Camden was this judge, this freedom-loving judge, Lord Camden, issued rulings that later became the American Fourth Amendment, the American Fifth Amendment. The founding fathers of America revered Lord Camden. They named cities. Camden, New Jersey is named for Lord Camden. Camden Yards, where the Baltimore Orioles play baseball in Baltimore, is named for Lord Camden. The founding fathers revered these great freedom-oriented judges. And these modern judges, I do not understand them. Why, if they just went for freedom, if they just became known for freedom, they would have statues. They would live eternally in the hearts of their countrymen. And yet I do not understand why the modern judges seem to bend over backwards to support expansive, intrusive government.
It's like they're part of some kind of sadistic, satanic cult or something. I don't know, or mafia. I don't understand it. And I was thinking, like, Judge Kelly, you could become America's judge. Just do the right thing and drop these seditious conspiracy charges or something. But nothing. Instead, I recall his face turning red as Zachary Rail was getting, and he grinned. His face turns red and he grins as he sentenced Zachary Rail for 17 years. He just took glee, slamming the hammer down and throwing the book at these guys. Literally, viscerally. And there's no transparency in these courtrooms, Roger. Is this like normal? Where, like, for me as a journalist, it really takes a lot of scribbling in a notebook and trying to. You can't record, you can't take pictures. What's this about? Isn't this? Could we file a lawsuit for transparency in these courtrooms?
It is. That's another disgrace. It's a disgrace. The Sixth Amendment to the Constitution literally says that the accused has a right to public trial. Now, that means that the public has a right to watch these things. And yet, we've all seen that in federal court, at least, the public is treated like worse than just a second-class peasant. When they try to come to court, they have to go through all this security. They're giving orders and commands. And the marshals will terrorize and threaten. How dare you? You're not supposed to even smile when you're watching these court proceedings. And it's so difficult. Like you said, you're a reporter. It's unbelievably expensive in terms of trying to report to the American public what is really going on. And if there were video and television cameras allowed in these courtrooms, the American people would see how evil they have become. We see this in the state courts. A lot of the states allow cameras. A lot of them allow live broadcasts of trials at the state level. And we see this, and it keeps the system a little bit more fair and a little bit more honest, because people can turn on the TV and see these proceedings. And yet in federal court, where the government is just grinding people into hamburger. The darkness and evil that allows this to happen is just perpetuated by these rules that do not allow cameras or television live broadcasts. It
No, it's
really is a
almost like they want
disgrace.
to rub it in your face while they air the Johnny Depp trial from sea to shining sea, while these January 6 cases are happening in the dark in a closet, and on a good day, maybe some observers will come and sit in the gallery or a reporter will show up. I mean, there's barely even many reporters in that courthouse besides the left wing. Roger, why don't you leave us with some solutions here? What could we do to help you win your cases? How do we bolster the defense of January 6th defendants? How do we free all the political hostages?
I'm not sure there's an easy solution. I'll just say these are political show trials, really. They're political trials. So the political winds need to shift. There has to be, I mean, and we all know, let's face it, I think you and I both recognize there are problems with the elections. The elections are either rigged or there's some real problems going on. And so I think the system is pretty well rigged for the government. The government has, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. They've pretty much got it rigged right now, and there has to be a massive groundswell of resistance and maybe just defiance on the part of the American people. And unless that happens, it's just going to keep going on. The government has so many more resources than the people have. They're just crushing us, and they're crushing freedom. They're crushing the First Amendment. They are destroying the First Amendment. I talked to, I'm sure you know Carmen Hernandez, the great defense lawyer. She is a lifelong Democrat. She is a liberal, and of course, she represented Zach Reel, one of the Proud Boys, court appointed, and you know, there's nothing right wing about her. She is a left wing activist, and she said these cases are destroying the First Amendment, and it she told me it really just turns her stomach. She has had to watch this happen to the basic freedoms of the American people. It is so sad what's happening right now.
It's extremely draining. It's almost like a voodoo hex. Like just being in the courtroom, how drained you feel. It's like it emanates a some kind of evil energy. This whole thing, and I don't know how we're gonna create this ground swelling pushback because if it hasn't happened yet, is it gonna come? We're all waiting for Trump to come and save the day, but he looks ill equipped to defend himself in his own January 6 cases at this point.
Well, I'm a card carrying libertarian. I never voted for Trump. I'm a libertarian activist myself. I think the solution is budget cuts. We need smaller government. We need to stop worshiping government. These marble palaces, there's nothing special about the Capitol building. It's just another marble palace. We need to stop treating it as some sacred temple. You know, I mean, we need to stop treating government as some sacred cow that can't be criticized. All of us need to just shout and yell and petition government for redress of grievances every single day. And I joke around on Twitter sometimes. I say every government building should be stormed and ransacked on a daily basis. And I'm joking, but the point is,
Well, that might be put you in prison soon in the next season 2 of all of this. That's the conundrum here because this sets precedent to destroy the First Amendment. And where does it end? When is the FBI can just say, hey, you said some horrible stuff about us 3 years ago on February 6th, so you're coming with us in a pre-dawn raid. I can't say, I can't explain how many more times since Joe Biden's been installed into the White House, I fear a knock on the door might be the feds. The FBI could show up at any time, God forbid, for absolutely nothing, for your associations and your conversations and what you said to yourself in the car when you were angry one day, like, because you're surveilled. It can get that far.
America had these great foundations, you know, in terms of the great ideas of freedom that we all know that America was based on in the beginning. For some people, not all, but the point is, here we are. We've reached a stage where I fear that the stage has been set for the darkest tyranny that's ever existed on the surface of the earth, and I fear there will be genocide because the government is so powerful. It is so powerful right now. It can kill anyone at once. The courts don't stand in their way. The political system doesn't stop them. And I've never seen it where government is just so powerful and able to do whatever it wants against the American people.
Well, thank you for the work you do, Roger. Evil prevails when good men do nothing, and you are one who is in the fight all day, every day, fighting for the rights of these defendants. So thank you for your time. Tell us where we can follow you and how we can maybe support your work.
Well, of course, I'm with the John Pierce Law Firm. I actually have a institution I have called Lysander Spooner University, and I have a website, lysanderspooneruniversity.com, named for the great libertarian and abolitionist in the 1800s, Lysander Spooner. And of course, John Pierce also is the founder of a great organization called the National Constitutional Law Union. That's nclu.com. And it fundraises for a lot of these J6ers that cannot, frankly, a lot of our clients cannot actually pay their legal bills. And so, anyone who wants to support, and honestly, another problem is that the support network is so tapped out. Almost no one has any money. The government just has so much money compared to what we have.
And the government is increasing inflation rapidly, so it's just drying us up, all of us up, to even donate. Thank you so much, Roger. I hope we get a chance to talk with you again soon. And wow, it's befuddling every single day. But what can we do except keep telling the truth, keep standing up, and keep fighting?
That's right. Well, thank you so much, Alicia.
All right, talk with you soon. God bless.
God bless you.